Recall them. Make we talk about Martin Luther King. Make we talk about Fidel Castro. Make we talk about Miss Rosa Parks. They've been fighting for our rights.
The African continent have had great leaders. Some were celebrated and some were not. Many unsung African heroes have died without Africans recognizing their greatness. Meet our unsung hero of the day. Only on African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio.
Produit suffisamment de quoi nourrir. Nous pouvons dépasser même notre production. Malheureusement, par manque d'organisation, nous sommes encore obligés de tendre la main pour demander des aides alimentaires. Ces aides alimentaires qui nous bloquent, qui nous inspirent, qui installent dans nos esprits cette habitude, ces réflexes de mendiants. Nous devons mettre de côté ces aides par notre grande production. Il faut réussir à produire plus. Produire plus. Produire plus parce que il est normal que celui qui vous donne à manger vous dicte également. C'est votre...
Thomas Isidore Noël Sankara was a Burkinabé military officer, a Marxist, Leninist revolutionary and also a Pan-Africanist who served as a president of Burkina Faso from his coup in 1983 to his deposition and murder in 1987. Viewed by supporters as a charismatic and iconic figure of revolution, he is commonly referred to as Africa's Che Guevara. Born on 21 December 1949 in Yako, French Upper Volta, as a third of 10 children to Joseph and Marguerite Sankara, Thomas Sankara spent his early years in Guevara, a town in the humid southwest, to which his father was transferred as an auxiliary paramilitary officer. He attended his primary school at Bobo Dioulasso, where he excelled in mathematics and French through his seriousness with his studies. He went to church often and, impressed with the energy and eagerness to learn, some of the priests encouraged Thomas to go on to a theological seminary school once he finished primary school. Despite initially agreeing to this, he surprised the colonial master's tricks to go to a theological seminary school, a brainwashing institution. Instead, he took the exams required for entry to the 6th grade in the secular education system and passed. Thomas' decision to continue his education at the nearest Rinchi or Kwizini Kuribari, named after a pre-independence nationalist, proved to be a turning point. At the Raisi, Sankara made close friends including Fidel Toure, whom he later named a minister in his government, and Saoumane Toure, who was in a more advanced class. His Roman Catholic parents wanted him to become a priest, but he chose to enter the military. The military was popular at the time, having just ousted a despised president. It was also seen by young intellectuals as a national institution that might potentially help to discipline the inefficient and corrupt bureaucracy, counterbalance the inordinate influence of traditional chiefs, and generally help modernize the country. He entered the military academy of Kadiogo in Ouagadougou with the academy's first intake of 1966 at the age of 17. After basic military training in secondary school in 1966, Sankara began his military career at the age of 19 and a year later was sent to Madagascar for officer training at Antisurabe, where he witnessed popular uprisings in 1971 and 1972 against the government of Philibert Tsiranana and first read the works of Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, profoundly influencing his political views for the rest of his life. Returning to Upper Volta in 1972, he fought in a border war between Upper Volta and Mali by 1974. He earned fame for his performance in the conflict, but years later would renounce the fighting as useless and unjust, a reflection of his growing political consciousness. Sankara was a decent guitarist. He played in a band named Tout Akup Jazz and rode a bicycle. In 1976, he became commander of the Commando Training Center in Port. In the same year, he met Blaise Compaoré in Morocco. During the presidency of the Colonel Saye Zebo, a group of young officers formed a secret organization called the Communist Officers Group, the best-known members being Henry Zongo, Jean-Baptiste Bokari, Blaise Compaoré, and Thomas Sankara. Sankara was appointed Minister of Information in Saye Zebo's military government in September 1981. He differentiated himself from the government officials in many ways, such as biking to work every day instead of driving a car. While his predecessors would censor journalists and newspapers, Sankara encouraged investigative journalism and allowed the media to print whatever it found. This led to publications of government scandals by both privately owned and state-owned newspapers. He resigned on 12 April 1982 in opposition to what he saw as the regime's anti-labor drift, declaring misinformation to those who gang the people. Sankara became Prime Minister in January 1983, but he was dismissed on 17 May. In between those 4 months, Sankara pushed Ouedraogo's regime for more progressive reforms. Sankara was then arrested. Henry Zongo and Jean-Baptiste Bokari were also placed under arrest. The decision to arrest Sankara proved to be very unpopular with the young officers in the military regime, and his imprisonment created enough momentum for his friend Blaise Compaoré to lead another coup supported by Libya, which was at the time on the verge of war with France in Chad, which made Sankara president on 4th August 1983 at the age of 33. Thomas Sankara saw himself as a revolutionary and was inspired by the examples of Cuba's Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and Ghana's military leader Jerry Rawlings. As president, he promoted the democratic and popular revolution. The ideology of revolution was defined by Sankara as an anti-imperialist in a speech on 2nd October 1983 written by his close associate. His policy was oriented towards fighting corruption and promoting reforestation. On 4th August 1984, the first anniversary of his accession, he renamed the country Burkina Faso, meaning the land of upright people, in More and Dura, the two major languages of the country. He also gave it a new flag and wrote a new national anthem himself. Sankara's first priorities after taking office were feeding, housing and giving medical care to his people who desperately needed it. He launched a mass vaccination program in an attempt to eradicate polio, meningitis and measles, and from 1983 to 1985, 2 million Burkinabés were vaccinated. Prior to Sankara's presidency, infant mortality in Burkina Faso was about 20.8%. During his presidency, it fell to 14.5%. Sankara's administration was also the first African government to publicly recognize the AIDS epidemic as a major threat to Africa. Large-scale housing and infrastructure projects were also undertaken. Brick factories were created to help build houses in efforts to end urban slums. In an attempt to fight deforestation, the People's Harvest of the Forest nurseries were created to supply 7,000 village nurseries, as well as organizing the planting of several million trees. All regions of the country were soon connected by a vast road and a rail building program. Over 700 kilometers of rail was laid by Burkinabé people to facilitate manganese extraction in the Battle of the Rails without any foreign aid or outside money. These programs were an attempt to prove that African countries could be prosperous without foreign help or aid. Improving women's status in Burkinabe society was one of Sankara's explicit goals, and his government included a large number of women. Sankara's government banned female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and polygamy, while appointing women to high governmental positions and encouraging them to work outside the home and stay in school, even if when they are pregnant. He also promoted contraception and encouraged husbands to go to the market and prepare meals to experience for themselves the conditions faced by women. On international relations, Sankara defined his program as anti-imperialist. In this respect, France became the main target of revolutionary rhetoric. These attacks culminated in Francois Mitterrand's visit to Burkina Faso in November 1986, during which Thomas Sankara violently criticized the French policy for having received Peter Botha, the Prime Minister of South Africa, and Jonas Savimbi, the leader of UNITA in France, both covered in blood from head to toe. French economic aid was reduced by 80% between 1983 and 1985. Thomas Sankara sent young Burkinabés to Cuba in September 1986 to receive professional training and to participate in the country's development upon their return. He denounced the support of the United States to Israel and South Africa. He called on African countries to boycott the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. At the United Nations General Assembly, he also denounced the invasion of Grenada by the United States, which responded by implementing trade sanctions against Burkina Faso. Also at the UN, he called for an end to the veto power granted to the great powers. In the name of the right of peoples to sovereignty, he supported the national demands of the Western Sahara, Palestine, and Nicaraguan Sandinistas and the South African ANC. While he had good relations with Ghanaian leader Jerry Rawlings and Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, he was relatively isolated in the West. Leaders close to France, such as Houphouët-Boigny in Côte d'Ivoire and Hassan II in Morocco, were particularly hostile to him. In the 1980s, when ecological awareness was still very low, Thomas Sankara was one of the few African leaders to consider environmental protection priority. As part of a development program involving a large part of the population, 10 million trees were planted in Burkina Faso in 15 months during revolution. He sold off the government fleet of Mercedes cars and made the Renault 5, the cheapest car sold in Burkina Faso at that time, the official service car of the ministers. He reduced the salaries of well-off public servants, including his own, and forbade the use of government chauffeurs and first-class airline tickets. He opposed foreign aid, saying that he who feeds you controls you. He spoke in forums like the Organization of African Unity against what he described as the neo-colonialist penetration of Africa through Western trade and finance. He called for a united front of African nations to repudiate their foreign debts. He argued that the poor and the exploited did not have an obligation to repay money to the rich and exploiting. In Ouagadougou, Sankara converted the army's provisioning store into a state-owned supermarket open to everyone, the first supermarket in the country. He forced well-off civil servants to pay 1 month's salary to public projects. He refused to use the air conditioning in his office on the grounds that such luxury was not available to anyone but a handful of Burkinabés. As a president, he lowered his salary to $450 a month and limited his possession to a car, 4 bikes, 3 guitars, a refrigerator, and a broken freezer. He required public servants to wear a traditional tunic woven from Burkinabé cotton and sewn by Burkinabé craftsmen. He was also known for jogging unaccompanied through Ouagadougou in his tracksuit and posing in his tailored military fatigues with his mother of pearl pistol. On 15th October 1987, Sankara was killed by an armed group with 12 other officials in a coup d'etat organized by his former colleague Blaise Compaoré. When accounting for his overthrow, Compaoré stated that Sankara jeopardized foreign relations with former colonial power France and the neighboring Ivory Coast and accused his former comrade of plotting to assassinate opponents. Sankara was attending a meeting and his assassins singled out Sankara and executed him. Sankara's body was riddled with bullets to the back and he was quickly buried in an unmarked grave while his widow Mariam and 2 children fled the nation. Compaoré immediately reversed the nationalization, overturned nearly all the Sankara's policies, rejoined the International Monetary Fund and World Bank to bring in desperately needed funds to restore the shattered economy and ultimately spanned most of Sankara's legacy. Compaoré's dictatorship remained in power for 27 years until it was overthrown by popular protest in 2014. 20 years after his assassination, Sankara was commemorated on 15th October 2007 in ceremonies that took place in Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, Niger, Tanzania, Burundi, France, Canada, and the United States of America. That was our unsung hero of the day. Meet me again next time as I'll bring to you another unsung hero of the day. Until then, stay tuned to African Eyes Radio, your revolutionary radio.
Capitaine Sankara, ce sont tes bras qui t'ont déjà. Un coup d'état entraîne toujours d'autres coups d'état. Et les frères d'armes, tôt ou tard, deviennent ennemis. Et ça, je vous l'avais déjà dit. Le pouvoir se prend par les urnes et non par les